Good morning. Today we're talking about what I miss about Mormonism, which is kind of I think maybe a funny episode topic idea, just because I have talked a lot about the things I don't like about Mormonism. But I feel that a lot of content I see from ex-Mormons, they don't really talk about the stuff they miss or the things that are still a part of them, or maybe like the things that they think are true about Mormonism. So let's talk about that. The reason why I want to do this is because actually the other day, Leah said to me, she's like, I don't know if this sounds crazy, but I kind of miss the church. And I said, no, that's like totally reasonable. I feel like I miss the church too. There's a lot that you get by being Mormon. Like you get community, you have this a sure knowledge of the truth is kind of like how they say it. Let me switch this screen real quick. There we go. And it's not necessarily that I think like the church as a whole is true. It's more so that there are certainly aspects. Good morning, Leah. There are certainly aspects of Mormonism that are hard to let go of, and there's parts that I don't think I will ever be able to let go of. It's kind of like you can take the boy out of Mormonism, but you can't take the Mormonism out of the boy. Almost. There's parts of me that are like forever and always going to have a touch of Mormonism in them. And I don't it's not like I regret leaving the church, and I don't think Leah does either. It's just hard. And like I said, there's parts of it that we miss. So, to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, we'll start with like some of the good stuff, the things I like genuinely miss, a few of the stories of things that have happened that I felt like were really good, and then we'll talk about maybe like kind of what I thought I had, what I thought was part of Mormonism, but maybe like my perspective has changed a little bit, what I'm still holding on to, like the parts that are always going to be with me. Like I said, you can take the boy out of the Mormons, but you can't take the Mormons out of the boy. So yeah, I think that should be a pretty good overview. And if you are currently LDS, this will be a good one for you to watch, because this isn't about like being bitter or anything like that. Like this is what I miss. So let's get right into it. One of the things that I miss most about Mormonism, I've mentioned this a little bit before, was kind of like prayer. And it's not exclusive to Mormonism, but this is something that I think is like, in my opinion, prayer is sort of just meditation that's being masked as from somebody else. Like, I don't think that when you're praying, you are getting an answer from like a different being, but I think you're tapping into your intuition and your subconscious. But there is something about praying to an all-knowing being and like really truly believing that he's gonna help you that is super comforting. And there's just the ritual of like praying before every meal, praying first thing in the morning, praying when you go to bed. And it's hard to replace that with meditation. Every time my family comes over for dinner, there's always this like awkward moment right before we start eating where I finish cooking. We've all sat down at the table and I look around and I go, okay, go ahead and eat. Like, I don't know what to say, because previously we always would say, all right, let's say a prayer and then we'll eat. And I always say, like, you guys can pray. I think there's a few times when we've actually done a prayer at our house when we've had them over for dinner. But it's just like an easy way to transition into things. It's a good way to like open up any sort of activity, or I don't know. It's just a thing, and you can't really like replace that. So that's probably the first thing that I missed. And then another huge part of Mormonism that I miss is the community. And this is something I think everybody would struggle with when leaving any religion or any organization, is the sense of belonging that you have. You have like monthly potlucks, you have like youth activities, young single adult wards. Like, you have a lot of opportunities to meet people and get close. And like, you have a ward, they call it a ward family, right? And you're calling everybody at church brother and sister, which maybe a little bit odd for outsiders, but internally you get this like sense of camaraderie. And it's just very hard to replace the community aspect of a religion. I feel like I kind of touched on this one a little bit. There's not a whole lot that goes into community and like feeling like, I mean, it's to me, it feels pretty self-explanatory. This one, I feel like I was a little surprised when I realized that I missed the structure and the routine of every single week. Wake up, get ready for church, go to church, like have your sacrament, testimony meeting, whatever, and then go to class. Like, there's something that feels like you're resetting the week. And it almost makes you like more aware of the passage of time when you have that weekly ritual and schedule. But in our efforts, Leah and I have tried to kind of replace some of that routine. One of the things that we do now is something we call Self-Care Sunday, where usually I will do some sort of like massage, or like last night I did surgery on Leah's toe because her toenail is falling off. But it's just, we're trying to kind of emulate that ritual. It's something that if you've left religion, it might be really helpful to try and find your own rituals and structure, and having a routine and a rhythm with whatever it is that you're doing for your spirituality. And I do think that it's really good to connect with yourself and kind of tune in regularly and frequently. So like I said, meditation, doing self-care, that kind of stuff, I feel has been a really helpful replacement for Leah and I. But it doesn't fully replace it, so I still miss it. The third thing, I think, is what we're on now. Maybe I sort of combined structure and routine like into one. So the third thing I miss about Mormonism. Good morning, Colin. welcome. Welcome to the show. It's good to see you again. The third thing I miss about Mormonism was the purpose and identity that it gave me, the context of my story. As I've said before, like, Mormonism teaches that you are the direct descendants of God, like an actual literal child of God, and that you're gonna become like God, and you're like the kings and queens of Godhood or something. I don't know exactly how best to describe it, but it tells you like exactly who you are and what your purpose is, and you have a place in the plan of salvation, or like the eternal plan. And when you leave Mormonism, or when you leave a religion in general, I feel like it's one of the most destabilizing things that you can possibly do, and dysregulating as well. Like, you really, your purpose, your identity, your perspective on life, it all has to shift, and it gives you like this massive identity crisis in a way. I'm still working on replacing that. I think what's helped with the purpose and identity struggle has been kind of returning to, it's funny because I use principles that I've learned from Mormonism to help me process leaving Mormonism sometimes. So like, and this isn't exclusive to Mormonism, but like become as a little child has been the primary guiding force or phrase that I use when I'm reconstructing my identity post-Mormonism. And the reason why is because I feel like, I mean, everybody, as you go through life, expectations kind of pile on, and you slowly put on like layers of masks or roles that you feel you need to play. And so when I no longer had all those expectations of who I was supposed to be or who I thought I was, all of these roles I was meant to fulfill, I was like, I'm nobody. Who am I without this church, without this story? So I had to kind of just rewind through time and like really look, what did I care about as a kid? What was I curious about? What drove me to do things before I felt like I had a full, maybe, understanding of Mormonism. Next on my list is a hard one, because it's more of like, I kind of miss the principles that I've sort of picked. I kind of pick and choose sometimes with this, and I did this while I was Mormon too, of kind of some stuff I just have always disagreed with, or I've always had issues with or struggled with. And the things that I miss, one of them is actually the priesthood, which is kind of a weird thing to really think about. In Mormonism, they believe that Joseph Smith had angels come down and give what's called the priesthood to him and a few other apostles at the time. And he basically says that the priesthood as Christ had it was lost. And so nobody really had like the authority to perform ordinances such as baptism. It's one of the reasons why they rebaptize people when you join the Mormon church, is because they basically say like, yeah, whatever you did before, not real, because they didn't have like the actual priesthood. When Leah and I first got married, I think we came to Missouri, and there was a day when she was feeling kind of like sick. And I've had many experiences with priesthood blessings, which is where you have a priesthood holder. They put something called consecrated oil, which is like olive oil that has been blessed. And you put like a drop or two on the head of the person that you're going to give a blessing to. And then you put your hands on top of their head and you consecrate, or like I think you seal the oil, like anoint the oil, something like that. There's a thing that you do before you actually give the blessing, and often it'll be a different person. So you like put the oil on their head, say a little prayer, take your hands off, and then you put your hands back on top of their head, and they're like sitting in a chair. And you can have one person or like a bunch of guys, and they're all men, because only men can have the priesthood in Mormonism, which is something I had a problem with. Not like, never mind. We'll talk about that a different time. So you put your hands on their head, and then you basically just say like, by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood, which is the like upper level of priesthood. You get the Aaronic priesthood when you're 12 or 11. The year that you turn 12, you get the Aaronic priesthood. And then you can get the Melchizedek priesthood when you're 18, after you go through the temple, as a man. So you put your hands on their head and you say like, by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood, which I hold, I'm going to give you a blessing, basically. And when we moved to Missouri, Leah was feeling a little bit sick. And so I put my hands on her head and I was giving her a blessing with my dad. And it was a really touching moment, but also a moment of a lot of pressure for me. I was like definitely feeling that this was supposed to be miraculous. You know, there was this pressure to make it be this magical thing. And I don't think I'd really like used the Melchizedek priesthood before that. So I was like, what's going to happen when I do this? Like, is it going to be a whole new level of spirituality and a connection and experience? So I sat there for a second after I said like the opening words, which is the same words every single time. And then it's kind of like, now say what you feel like you're supposed to say. And I felt like I had like, it was like a string got pulled from like me to heaven or something. I don't know. This was my visualization of it. And I really did feel like a connection to love, a very like strong source of love that was genuinely concerned about Leah. And I felt like I was able to tune in to her emotions and her experience, and I could kind of feel maybe like what she needed to hear or wanted to hear. And I've talked before a little bit about how like the spiritual placebo almost, of like, if you want to believe that you're going to be speaking tongues, then you can start speaking tongues or be taken over by the Holy Ghost or whatever. So I kind of am like, where did that come from? What was this sensation? What's this feeling that I experienced when it came to the priesthood? And I think it actually works. Like, if you give a blessing to a person that's sick, like it's kind of strange or eerie or uncanny how frequently it seems to be effective. And I do think there's certainly a portion of the effectiveness that could be attributed to placebo. But I also think there's more going on there. Like, I think that there's something genuinely powerful about putting your hands on somebody's head and then just like trying to tune in, right? Like you're trying to sense, what does this person need? And I think there's something powerful about just connecting to a person in that way, even beyond like if you have the right priesthood lineage and the rituals memorized or all that stuff. And that's probably blasphemous for me to say, but it's almost like having the structure of the religious practices from Mormonism kind of feels like it gives me permission to do weird things, like say a prayer out loud over a meal, and like unite everybody at that table in one thought and one phrase or one experience for a moment. And that's where I think like the real power of prayer and priesthood comes from, is it allows you to tap into something that we don't really understand, and it gives you like a framework to interact with it, with that feeling and that sensation. Something I definitely don't miss is General Conference, though. Twice a year, having to sit down for hours and hours and watch people say like the same thing that they always say every year. I don't miss that. Now, let's move on to the next section here. Kind of like what I thought I had with Mormonism. These are things that I miss. But before we move to the next section, it looks like Colin just sent a message. He says, love, connection, and physical touch are all immensely powerful. Yes. I think back about this. There was a study that was being done where they were like poisoning rabbits. They were feeding them some sort of thing that was supposed to be toxic, to test something. I don't remember exactly, but one group of rabbits like broke the experiment because it was like the effects were nothing that was expected or fit the trend of feeding poison to rabbits. Like, it was like, why are these rabbits perfectly okay? And it was because the scientist who was in charge of feeding the rabbits the poison, she would play with the rabbits and like kind of like pet them and love on them a little bit when she was feeding them. And they found that that act alone helped them to combat the toxic parts of the poison, essentially, that they were giving them. So I think about that all the time, of like, love is so much more powerful than we realize, and the physical touch aspect is so much more powerful than we even know. And I think that there is a lot more going on than we realize. I think it was yesterday I was watching this little ant crawl around, and it was like rubbing its antenna on things and stuff. And it seemed to just like, it seemed to be able to sense and see things that like I couldn't see or feel or pick up on. And it made me think that just there's so much more going on that we aren't consciously aware of. I don't know. I think I told Leah the other day, I think that our hair helps us pick up vibes from people, but I was just being silly. Okay. So yeah, we'll move on to the next section now. Thank you for your comment, Colin. I appreciate that. I really miss that love and connection aspect, and having that framework to tap into shared love, connection, meditation, etc. Without that framework, it kind of feels like you're trying to hold like a tray of Jell-O, but there's no tray, and so you just are like, you can't get a good grip on it. So the framework just helps you interface and connect with something that's already there and universal that anybody can tap into, but it just helps you. So yeah, the next section I want to talk about like things that I thought I had. So some of the things that I miss about Mormonism are things that I thought were either exclusive to Mormonism or like part of Mormonism, but they were either like illusions or like conditional things. Like, for example, I miss feeling like I know all of the answers. I miss feeling like I can find all of the answers and that I have access to people who know all of the answers. It's almost like, what's that called? Where you intentionally, it's ignorance. What's it called? Like intentional, willful ignorance or something like that. If somebody in church says, like, you ask a question and somebody says a response, sometimes there's this like just blind acceptance because you like questions, uncertainty, and things of that nature are uncomfortable. And so when you can easily get an answer that you can just accept as like satisfying, that it's super comforting. And I miss that a lot. But I've also realized that a lot of that was just that I chose to accept it. You know, I chose to accept the answer and then stop worrying about the question because I felt like, yeah, that covers it, so I can move on. I also feel like for a while I used this analogy to explain what it was like leaving the church shortly after we told my family. And I said it was like I was holding a fruit bowl, and over time I noticed that like some of the fruit was rotten or moldy, or like there was just stuff that I didn't like in there maybe. And so as I progressed in my religious journey, at first I was just like, yeah, all of this fruit is good, and I just ate it without like looking at it, without thinking. I was just like, yeah, it's fruit, just eat it. And eventually I like looked at the fruit more closely, and I started picking out the things that I didn't like, or like eating around the mold or things. And over time I started to realize that it wasn't that like the fruit itself was going bad or rotten, but I actually looked at the bowl, and the bowl that was holding the fruit was dirty. That every time I put, even if it was clean fruit into the bowl, or somebody put clean fruit into my bowl was dirty. And I think that one of the illusions, or the things that I thought I had, was like access to fruit that was exclusive, like the truth, the one true church. But in the process of leaving, it was like I stopped staring at my fruit bowl and worrying like if the fruit I was grabbing was rotten or a good fruit, or even fruit it's like even actually fruit instead of some, I don't know, poisonous berry. And I like looked up and realized, oh my gosh, I'm sitting in a fruit orchard. There's fruit all over the place. I can go get fruit. And I think that recognizing that there's spirituality and love and connection all around you, and that there isn't just one source of that stuff, has been incredibly helpful and freeing in my journey of processing leaving Mormonism. So I thought I had access to like the exclusive club of truth and light and knowledge and fruit. But when you really step out and you realize like everybody has a little bit of the truth, everybody has a little bit of the fruit to offer. And if you look closely, or if you just are open to it, there's fruit everywhere. And whether you believe it's God or the universe, you can get fruit. You can go find it. Colin says that his mustache picks up on vibes. He's in the Navy and he has this fantastic mustache. And I 100% think that mustache, beards, think about it. Have you ever met a guy who wasn't slightly more wise or seemed to be kind of in tune with like another layer of knowledge because he had a beard or a facial hair? Like, I don't know, it does something to you. Look at an ant. They have those little antennae. You don't think that one of our hairs or some of our hairs are picking up on vibes? Like if you lightly brush the hair on your arm, if you have hair on your arm like me, you like, it amplifies that sensation that you're feeling. It's almost how you feel the wind too. If like you feel the wind through your hair because it tossles your hair or tossles your hair. I don't know what the word is. I don't know. So yeah, Colin, I believe that your mustache totally picks up on vibes. I'm trying to think of if there was something else that I forgot to touch on. I think I'm good. I think that there was pretty much those two things. That I felt like I had something unique, that like I couldn't have access to these things I thought I lost when I left the church, but I realized that like they weren't exclusive. And a lot of the things I said before aren't exclusive either, but they're just very hard to replace. I want to talk a little bit now, moving into the next section, about what I have taken from Mormonism and adapted to my life now. Maybe like what I've reclaimed or rebuilt using I use that analogy of like building a tower of sticks. So it's like I'm reusing pieces from the Tower of Mormonism. I talk about story a lot. That's how I get purpose. And as I look at my life, or just life in general, the human experience, it is very filtered through this lens of Christianity, of Mormonism, of like feeling like there's meant to be a plan, and that it's all connected, you know. And so there's a lot of what I believe now, and this is somewhat of a disclaimer, that I have like empty spaces in my heart, essentially, that I'm trying to refill with things that seem to fit in those spaces. I've been listening to Carolyn, I think her name is pronounced Carolyn Mace, but it's M-Y-S-S. So I've been calling her Mice or Miss. I don't know, but I think it's Mace. And I didn't realize that she was born and raised Catholic. So like everything, a lot of the things that she says are filtered through that lens. And it's been really enlightening to listen to her talk, because she brings like a different flavor of Christianity, and it helps me to identify and see like, oh, that feels like it's slightly different than what I thought or felt. And I see now that maybe that interpretation comes from a Christian lens. And so meditation for me has become like my version of prayer in a way. Going and sitting outside and listening to the birds is like going to church for me. It's finding moments that make me feel the aspects or the things about my religion that I miss. I'm still working on the community aspect. It is super hard for me to find people that I seem to click with. But I feel like I have a stronger sense of spirituality and connection than I ever did, because one aspect of maybe the way I interpreted my Christian and Mormon beliefs was this sort of focus on making sure that like I get to heaven. Not necessarily in like a self-centered or self-focused way, but if somebody else is sinning, like, it doesn't really affect me. Like, I don't know, but now I feel a lot more connected to just the human experience in general, like other people, individuals, and recognizing that like everybody's experience is just as real as my own. And like, if you could measure the happiness of the human species, service and kindness goes such a long way. And that it can come and it can appear in so many different ways if you are open to it, and if you're willing to have an open mind. It's made me especially grateful for kind strangers. There are definitely some parts about Mormonism that I can't replace, though. That I think are like truly just gone, that I've had to mourn losing. But they're not, it's like hard to identify them as single words or single concepts or things. It's more of just like the general energy, the general vibes. I think that's pretty much all I have on what I miss about Mormonism. If you are listening right now and you have left or are still in a religion, or you've changed, converted to something else, wherever you are, I hope that you have patience for your process and your journey, and I hope that you are able to find something that fills you up, makes you feel like you belong and that you're loved and that your life has meaning. And if people get that, whether it's from Mormonism or spirituality in general, or Buddhism or Catholicism, whatever, I think that's true. And so maybe by that measure, the Mormon Church is true, because it does help people and it does answer some big questions for them. Makes life more manageable, a little easier to get through. But I think that to say it's the one true church is probably one of the biggest follies of Mormonism. And I kind of have a feeling like when Joseph Smith, so like the origin story of Mormonism is that Joseph Smith prayed and asked like what church he should join. I want to read the actual quote. Joseph Smith prayer about church to join. Let me read it. So it says, in 1820, Joseph Smith prayed in a grove of trees to know which church to join, and was visited by God the Father and Jesus Christ. They told him not to join any existing church, as they all contained false doctrines, according to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This experience, known as the first vision, led him to believe that the true church needed to be restored. I have some interesting theories around the gold plates and the first vision and Joseph Smith and all of that stuff. But I wonder if like he prayed and he misinterpreted the answer. I wonder if he said like, which church should I join? And the answer he got was more of like it doesn't really matter. They all have a little bit of truth and they all have a little bit of not truth, including Mormonism. Like there's definitely stuff that changes doctrinally or the practices or the organization, which basically means that Mormonism suffers from the same struggles as all the other religions that Joseph Smith was told to not join. And so I don't think that any person should say or believe that they have exclusive access to the truth or exclusive access to true happiness or anything like that. Like I think you should allow everyone to identify what is valuable to them, what matters to them, and pursue that and grow that. Colin just said, I'll take a moment to write out some thoughts. Some things I took from Mormonism is the questioning attitude. They always encouraged me to question the world, but they didn't think I'd turn it on them. Another thing is being sure of myself again. They wanted to be sure of the church, but I took it more like self-confidence. I learned that most things I need can come from within through work. Yeah, that is interesting. Mormonism definitely teaches you to doubt the world, and basically anytime like you see something in the news or somebody says something is true. Probably isn't, because it didn't come from a prophet. But it's interesting that like looking into the truth of things can lead to some people leaving what they were taught was true or told was true. And like I said, it's not really a question of whether something is the one true whatever, or whether it's just true in general. I think there's pieces of truth in a lot of things. The issue that I have, going back to the fruit bowl analogy, is that Mormonism caters the fruit that you have access to, and it almost in a way disempowers you from going out and getting your own fruit, because you feel that you have to go to like the fruit dealer in order to get it. When if you look around, there's fruit everywhere on all of these trees. And there's this like fear, a little bit of fear mongering of saying like, you're not going to be able to find fruit. You're not going to be able to find happiness if you leave, if you go somewhere else, or it's not going to be true happiness. It's not going to be true fruit. It's fake fruit. And that's something you definitely need to be careful of. But I think that it's a fear-based belief and a fear-based tactic to keep people in. So if you choose to stay, hopefully it's not because of a fear of what would happen to you or what your life would be like outside. The surety comment that Colin made is also really interesting. And I think it is perpetuated by this, like the one true church belief. And also this maybe a little bit of like the doubt your doubts mentality, which is like they tell you what the truth is, and then they say if you doubt something that we've told you, doubt your doubts. It's somewhat of a way of basically saying like, I want to, whatever I believe, I'm not going to let it change. It's this sort of reinforcement bias, or like, I wouldn't really call it confidence in your knowledge. It's more of just like a commitment to your knowledge. So for me, I feel like the way it impacted was, or the way that belief impacted me was, I mean, it actually made me doubt myself a lot. So it's interesting that your experience, Colin, was that it gave you the self-confidence to learn that what you need can come from within. I really like that. That's a good interpretation of it. It's interesting because it goes to show that two people can have different, like maybe the same teaching can leave different impacts. And that's the reason why I don't think there can be one true church. That's the reason why I don't think there's one true source of fruit. Everybody has different tastes and different ways that they digest and interpret things. Thank you for being here today. I hope you have a lovely Monday and a lovely week. Like I said, I really hope that you find your source of happiness, and that you know that happiness is abundant and available to you. That it's not something you need to be scared of getting. If you are struggling with that, or struggling with a change you've made, whether you've left Mormonism or a different religion, or maybe even left a job, I'd love to hear from you. That'll wrap up today's episode. Thank you. Love you. Thanks for watching. Bye.